Welcome back, everyone. This is The Changelog, and I'm your host, Adam Stacoviak. This is episode 165, and on today's show, Jared is going solo all by himself, talking to Brian Cardarella from Dockyard about betting the company on Elixir and Ember. Good show. We have three awesome sponsors, CodeShip, Code School, and HipChat. Our first sponsor is CodeShip. They launched a brand new feature called Organizations. Now you can create teams, set permissions for specific team members, and improve collaboration in your continuous delivery workflow. Maintain centralized control over your organization's projects and teams with CodeShip's new organization plan. You can save 20% off any premium plan you choose for the next 3 months by using the code TheChangelogPodcast. Again, that code is TheChangelogPodcast. 20% off any premium plan you choose for 3 months. Head to codeship.com/thechangelog to get started. And now on to the show.
Welcome back, everybody. Jared here. I am fresh off of our trip to Denver for GopherCon 2015. I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our new Gopher friends and listeners. And trust me, we lined up a ton of Go related shows in our pipeline. More on that later, but we had tons of fun handing out t-shirts and shooting video interviews with everybody. In fact, if you're wondering where is the mellifluous voice of Adam Stack, he's actually heads down in the editing room this week, turning all of our raw footage from the conference into something awesome. But don't worry, Adam will be back next week, and we will welcome Toby Knopp, who is the CTO of Mesosphere, to the show. Stay tuned for that. But today, I'm joined by Brian Cardarella, who is the CEO of Dockyard. Dockyard is a web and mobile user experience consultancy in Boston, Massachusetts. Brian, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So did I do you justice in the intro? Anything else you want to say about yourself as a way of introduction?
No, that's it. I'm sure we'll touch on a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I was thinking back of when you first came across my radar and in the open source world, and I think it was with your client-side validations gem.
Yeah.
Which for those who don't know, was a Ruby gem, and I think it was probably only in the context of Rails, which purpose was to give us the ultimate kind of dry validations where you define them once in your models, and then we can actually like traverse them down into, I think probably jQuery back then, into validations in the client side.
Right. So it will allow you to write them once. They'd export. Actually, there was some, before I even knew what transpilation was, It kind of did some Ruby to JavaScript transpilation. Really, really bad.
Right.
But it's interesting because client-side validations was my first like use case for how I've been writing code over the next few years. So like client-side validations was what motivated me to want to get more heavily interested in client-side application development, and specifically something as complex as Ember.
Yeah, I mean, I remember with the gem because that gem came out and it spoke to me very very tight, like inherently. I was like, yes, this is something that we need, something that I know I needed, and so I started using it. And I think I can't remember if I contributed back. I definitely did some bug reports for you back in the day.
Yeah,
and it seemed like a great goal, but it just was a difficult thing for you to achieve. I think it was working well, but there were a lot of issues. Did you struggle to actually like execute on that idea?
Well, the way that I wrote it originally, yes. So what client-side validations was doing under the hood was that it was trying to attach all these validation rules to input elements, and it was basing it off of string values, and then there was all this crazy rules in the back end. Within the library, not on the back end.
Right.
And that's not even taking account of like remote client-side validations. The uniqueness validator was a whole mess.
Yep.
But what I came to realize pretty early on, and this is what I mentioned how I became interested in Ember, was that client-side validations really needed a model to work against. It needed like a user model or something where you're actually going against specific values rather than just trying to piecemeal all these values off of input elements. And so when I was building on client-side validations, I actually went down the path. I don't know if the branch still exists on the repo, but I still went down the path of building out a very, very small and probably very poorly thought out like client-side framework just for re-implementing client-side validations. And I got to the point where like, this is crazy. I'll start looking at the Backbone. Backbone didn't really interest me, and that's where Ember was starting to get on my radar, and I went off in that direction. And then I realized that this whole, at least for me, the nature of server-side application development was really, I think, going to fall by the wayside, and client-side application development was going to be the next big thing. And so for someone that's running a business, I really wanted to get ahead of that curve and start establishing expertise there. So I kind of dropped client-side validations off of my plate. Sorry for those that were using it. I did due diligence to try to find a replacement author. I put the radar. I maintained it for like 6 months. I asked people if they wanted to take it over. Didn't get any takers, and so I finally sunset it. However, I think someone has taken it over now. I gave somebody. I don't know if they're still working on it, but I gave them somebody the Ruby Gems access, and they own the repo now. So hopefully it's found a good home. But that was always an interesting project from a technical point of view of trying to get Ruby over to JavaScript, but also from the point of view of, okay, I realized that this is the completely wrong direction for implementing this. And it's kind of taken me on this crazy journey to really becoming very well versed in client-side application development.
Yeah, and I think as this conversation progresses, we'll probably take that journey a little bit. I want to also mention something that you do annually, which I've been a fan of over the years. We just met, but I've been kind of following Dockyard to a degree because I'm also a consultant. I have a software company, employee number one. And I've always flirted with growing and not growing and the ideas behind it. So I follow other people that are doing that. I follow Thoughtbot to a degree and Dockyard, and just kind of watch, like to watch what you're doing. And you make that really easy because you publish this lessons learned post annually, which is kind of a year in review. It's kind of the entire life of your consultancy. And man, you're like crazy transparent in that post. Like I feel like you just kind of bear it all there. And I'm curious why you do that, and just have you talk about that.
So, several reasons. First, I think it's just in my nature. I tend to, I guess, wear my emotions and myself on my sleeve to a certain degree. I think anyone that follows me on Twitter kind of gets too much of that from time to time. I do a lot of Twitter complaining because I think that's the primary purpose of Twitter is just to like complain about things. Yeah. But the other reason, which is probably a more like politically correct thing to say, rather, is that when I was getting going with Dockyard, when I was, because I was a freelancer, I worked in enterprise, I worked in startups, and I finally had it with that world, and I said, I'm going to work for myself. And I went and started freelancing. I very quickly realized that I've really traded one boss for like, 10 or 20 bosses. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, however many you happen to have during a given year. So it's not really any more freeing. But I started getting more and more complex projects pushed my way. Stuff that required more than just me. So I reached out to a few people, and we were working on a project. We worked well together. We decided, okay, well, let's give this a shot and start a company. At the time, my LLC was horribly named. It was Dirty Water Development. For those that are from Boston, so for those that are from Boston and that are Red Sox fans, that's the song that the Red Sox play. The Standells love that Dirty Water. Yeah, it's a reference that went over everybody's head. Nobody got it, especially in light of when I was doing business under that LLC was when the Gulf oil spill happened.
Oh, no.
So everybody thought that this was somehow a tongue-in-cheek reference to the Gulf oil spill, which was not the case. So I think I realized very quickly that this was a bad name. And And I race sailboats. I want to do something nautical, so I really do want shipyard because I'm like, oh, shipyard, shipping software. That makes sense.
Right.
However, there's a shipyard beer in Maine, and they own that domain name. And so dockyard was the next obvious choice for me. And to go back to your original question, I started when I was starting the company. I was starting from zero, right? I've never run a company before. I grew up in a family, like my father ran his own company, my grandfather ran his own company, but very different businesses. So I kind of got a sense of what it takes to, like the effort that goes into running a company. But as far as the specifics around running a software consultancy, I really had no one to ask. I emailed a few people that were doing it. And what I realized very fast is that a lot of these shops they're just BSing people. They're lying. They're saying everything's great, everything's awesome because they feel that they have to put forth this image of excellence.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime that there is anything that's negative about them out there, they fear that they're going to lose out on a contract. They're going to lose out on an employee. They're going to lose out on anything. And so they just say everything's great, everything's awesome all the time. And I don't think that people learn from people's successes, because I think success is fleeting. Success is very difficult to duplicate. It's usually time-based. It's luck-based. You happen to be fortunate enough that you were in the right place at the right time and things worked out for you. That's, I think, the significant key to success sometimes. Effort and persistence is definitely part of that, but persistence actually just means that you're able to stick it out long enough so that you get lucky.
Mm-hmm.
Failures are super easy to duplicate. Failures happen all the time. And the way that you fail is probably very similar to the way that I fail. And telling me how you failed will allow me to help cope with and avoid that particular failure, or at least minimize the damage. And nobody wanted to talk about their failures. So I decided early on that if we can make it to 1 year, I think I did the first one after 6 months. And I wanted to share those lessons with people because I didn't see those lessons anywhere else. They were more of a cathartic thing for me. And I wasn't sure if anybody would like them, but they tend to get a lot of attention. I think that annually they're definitely the most read blog posts, at least at the time when I published them. We have some Ember posts that I think overall have got more traffic. But I talk about what went well, what didn't go well, what changes we can make in the upcoming year. I talk about how much money we've made. It's stupid not to talk about money, right? People don't like to share like their revenue. They don't like to share their rates. I don't know why. Maybe there's a really good business school reason not to do it, but I didn't go to business school. It's never hurt us in any way. And I really wouldn't want to run a company that we wouldn't be able to talk about these type of things. If we end up doing worse 1 year, it will be embarrassing to say that we didn't make as much money this year as we did last year. But that's, ultimately that lies upon me, and I need to own that.
Mm-hmm. So where do you draw the line? Do you have a line? Have you thought about that, or do you just bear it all, whatever you feel like saying in those kind of posts? Or are they?
If it impacts one of my employees directly or a former employee, it won't be brought up unless I've discussed it with them already.
Gotcha.
So a good example of that, I've discussed firing people, and one of the employees specifically was actually one of the co-founders of the company. And everyone hears this word firing and they think, oh, that's bad. But it's what it is. Like, we didn't lay them off. We didn't dismiss them. They were fired. And there's no two ways around it. And I discussed it with him. I said, I want to discuss this within this given context, in that, perhaps in this case, I was wrong. I did not, adequately set. So within that, for that specific person, I spoke about how, what ended up happening was when we co-founded the company, we never set expectations upon people's roles. And everything kind of fell upon me, and I was getting frustrated. And I think the lesson learned there was that when you're starting a company, you should probably not even, amongst your co-founders, not even split up ownership percentage until maybe 6 months in, when you get a sense on like, okay, here's what people are really doing. Because beforehand, you can dream up like, oh, you're going to do this, I'll do that. And then reality sets in, people will really own up to what the responsibilities are. You probably wait until that point in time before you decide, okay, this person's doing way more work than me. Perhaps my ownership percentage should be different than theirs. And that ownership percentage wasn't necessarily part of the problem there. It was more that I never really had expectations upon people beyond just development, and I should have set those expectations. So the failing was my failure. I think most of the firings that we've had at Dockyard have been my failure, with the exception of one or two. And that's me learning how to run a business. And I've gotten much better at it. I've gotten much better at, I guess, being very clear with employees, like, here is your role, here's your expectations, here's how you get to the next level. Or maybe I'm not as clear as I think I am. Perhaps my employees would think differently, but yeah. I think we're always working on it and trying to get better. So a good example of that is we actually created an RFP process for Dockyard. It's an open public process. Anyone can view and I guess participate, but we have one RFP that we've brought in so far. We actually have one RFP we've ever opened. If you go to Dockyard/RFPs, I think it's plural, on GitHub, you can see it. And this was around the career life cycle of an employee at Dockyard, how they can move up, what are the expectations there, what incentives they have tied to bonuses. Because every year we just put this in place. So we would always have, everyone gets $1,000 at the end of the year, regardless of what they've done. If you were here for half the year, it's prorated to 50%. And what we realized is that, hey, we might as well just increase everybody's salary by $1,000. This is not really an incentive. And so we determined a bunch of activities or events or things that people can be doing that will benefit Dockyard in some way. So if you go speak at a conference, if you speak at a meetup, if you're writing blog posts, if you're doing something that's helping the marketing of the company in some way, this will be calculated as part of a bonus at the end of the year. And it was never clear to people, like, what are those things? So we created this RFP in order to do that. So crazy amount of openness, I think, is a good thing. And we're always looking for ways to be more open.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just as an observer and somebody who, casually observes your openness over the years, I appreciate it because I draw insights from your trials and tribulations and your successes, and have kind of been able to track, the struggles of a software company. Or I guess now you guys have kind of focused in on, web and mobile experience company, but you've traditionally been an engineering company that's bigger than I am, and like thinking, should I try that? Should I not? And so it's fun from that perspective. I've also been following along, technically with a technology bent and just watching because I'm very interested in staying relevant and, keeping up with open source, which is, Changelog's mission, helping people do that. Yep. And so I've watched you over the years make certain decisions. I think that the Ember decision was a while back. But then most recently, the one that kind of surprised me, or maybe even just was impressed upon me that I remembered it, was in May of this year, 2015. You guys kind of relaunched the new dockyard.com website, which is very well put together, by the way. But you had a kind of intro post. And in that post on your guys' blog, you wrote this. You said, "This new website is also built how we believe modern web applications should be built, with Ember.js on the front end and Phoenix on the back end." Yep. I want to focus on that decision kind of for the remainder of the show. We were, as I said, we were kind of at GopherCon last week. Not kind of, we were at GopherCon last week. And there was
You're halfway there.
Yeah, just, actually we kind of felt halfway there because we were in the hallways more than anything else. But there was a great talk given by Kelsey Hightower, who's with CoreOS, where he said that kind of the title was how they bet the company on Go and how that bet paid off for them was kind of the content of the talk. Yep. And I don't know if you necessarily betting the company on Ember and Elixir, but it kind of feels like that to a certain degree. It's definitely a bold move to come out and say, this is how we believe modern web applications should be built. I'm going to stop for a sponsor break before you respond to all that setup. We'll hear from one of our awesome sponsors, and when we come back, I want to talk about that statement and whether or not it feels like you are betting the company.
All right, put them away, put them back, put the books back on the shelf. You don't need them, and learn to code by doing with Code School. Code School offers a variety of courses: JavaScript, HTML, CSS, Ruby, iOS, Git, and many, many more to help you expand your skills and learn new technologies. Code School knows that learning to code can be a daunting task, and they've combined experienced instructors with proven learning techniques to make coding educational and memorable. It gives you the confidence you need to continue past those rough, tough hurdles that you will definitely face learning to code. Code School also knows that languages are a moving target. They're always updating their content to give you the latest and the greatest learning resources. You can even try before you buy. Roughly 1 out of every 5 courses on Code School is absolutely and totally free. This includes introductory classes on Git, Ruby, jQuery, and much more, which allow free members to play full courses with coding challenges all included. You can also pay as you go. 1 monthly fee gives you access to every Code School course, and if you ever need a breather, take a break, you can suspend your account at any time. Don't worry, your account history, your points, your badges, they'll all be there when you're ready to pick things up again. Get started on sharpening your skills today at codeschool.com. Once again, that is codeschool.com.
All right, we're back. Brian, does it feel like you're betting the company on Ember, and does it feel like you're betting it on Elixir?
I don't think you can ever do that in software, right? Because there's always going to be something new. And you're just one blog post away from changing your mind.
From
right?
a new bet, yeah.
Yeah, like, oh, we decided. We went with framework, JavaScript 10.0, whatever.
Right.
But so the reasons why we started as a Rails consultancy. And I've been working with Rails since before 1.0. I think my true talent still lies with Rails and Ruby. I'm probably the most experienced of all the technologies I have worked with. I'm still the most experienced in Ruby and Rails. The reason why we as a consultancy decided to move away from that was because Rails has become a commodity at this point. It has accomplished what it set out to do. And I think I either touched on this in the blog post you referred to, or perhaps in our annual blog post at the end of last year. We found that we were not able to get the rates that we want to be getting with Rails work. The market is becoming oversaturated with beginners and because Rails has done so well what it set out to do, beginners can really get done maybe 80% of what a senior developer can do.
Mm-hmm.
It's that 20% that
Makes
you
all
really
the
need
difference
somebody.
in the world.
Yeah, it makes all the difference. But for getting an application up and running, that's fine. Scaling the application, different question.
Right.
So I started, and this is where we were poking around with Ember for a period of time, and I realized that this is perhaps a better business move to move over to a client-side application. If this is the way that we feel that the technology is going to swing, then if we can establish ourselves as an expert early on, then maybe we can do something similar to what Thoughtbot or HashRocket or Pivotal did in the Rails space, but we can do it with Ember. And to a certain degree, I think we've accomplished that in the Ember world. We have a pretty good reputation there. Our brand is pretty well recognized. We have a pretty good team. And I think for the most part, we're pretty well respected in that space. However, I don't think that Ember is ever going to rise to the size that Rails did.
Is the world big enough, to be sustainable for just that kind of work?
I think the JavaScript world is definitely big enough.
Yeah.
I think that the JavaScript framework world, though, is too fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
And Ember's piece of that pie is always going to be decent, and perhaps it may sustain a consultancy a little bit larger than ours. We're at 19 right now.
Mm-hmm.
Could probably sustain a consultancy around 30. But we're interested in really growing, getting big. So I don't think that Ember alone can do that. We were continuing to build out backends with Rails. And because now we have this super fast client-side application that's running and routing between pages felt instantaneous, the response time of the application, especially when we got into production and started going a little bit under scale, any slowdown in response time, any delay was really magnified under those conditions. I'd always been following Elixir. I really respect Jose Valim, and always seemed very interesting because it gave like this Ruby-like syntax on top of a technology that I've always been peripherally very, very interested in, which is Erlang.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine who worked at Basho, Chris Micklejohn, he has been talking about Erlang for a very long time. He's like, everyone, you got to try Erlang. So I looked into it. I'm like, I guess I'm a bit of a syntax snob. I think Ruby kind of ruined me in that way. And I saw the syntax, like, oh, I'm out. I can't do this. I just don't feel like it. It's such a...
I just don't feel like it, yeah.
Yeah, I just don't feel like it. It's such a weird thing to say that the syntax turned me off. And I think some people will point and laugh, like, that's stupid. But it was true. I think a lot of Ruby people tend to think that way. Or Ruby's kind of like ruined our mind. Like we desire good syntax. And that's the starting of the conversation for us when it comes to technology. Like, this is something I'm living in a lot. Like, how is the syntax? Is this going to look ugly? Is this going to be a pain in the butt? Am I going to be able to read it? Am I going to be able to teach it? And Erlang's syntax was, I think it's based on Prolog, maybe. It was just, I don't know, crazy weird. So, but when Elixir, I think, was getting close to 1.0, I revisited it. And Dave Thomas, I think around the same time, published his Programming Elixir book through PragProg. And he was one of the authors that got me interested in Ruby in the first place. So I bought the book. I don't download books. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting too old, but I like holding a book. I have a hard time reading PDFs. And
I think
I read
that's
it.
actually kind of universal. Like,
Really?
Yeah, there's been recent studies, even on like millennials or whatnot and teenagers today, where we thought ebooks were going to like take over and just make paper books irrelevant, but it finds they're just kind of augmenting. They're just another form of transport. People actually do like holding things. I agree with you, of course.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be me also getting ancient, but I think there's some studies behind the fact that that's actually. I think people do have. There's something about the physical medium and the holding of it that's I don't know. It's real. But anyways, go on.
All right, I'm not alone then.
You're not alone, definitely.
But I read the book. It was excellent, and in it, Dave even spoke about how he's excited. He's as excited about Elixir as he was when he first started doing Ruby. So that got me hooked into it. I respect Dave Thomas a lot, and the more I read in the book, the more I'm like, wow, this really makes a lot of sense to me, because I was never a Ruby developer who really got into the design pattern craziness. And I actually found that design patterns to a certain degree were being overused, overexploited, were misused quite a bit, and actually tended to do more damage in certain projects where you had like a lot of beginners were just taught patterns, like do this pattern, and that's what beginners get, right? They like to have like, here's my rules, but the pattern would become the hammer.
Yeah, like which pattern am I going to use here instead of like how do I solve this problem? Like which pattern should I use?
So we, as a shop, we inherited projects from consultancies or from freelancers or from existing teams, and we saw this all the time, and it became actually very difficult to follow and build off of properly. So what was nice, not that to say that Elixir or Erlang doesn't have patterns, but functional programming feels far more simplistic than object-oriented programming does. Object-oriented programming, I think, obfuscates a lot of what's going on, whereas functional programming is like literally, here's the data flowing through, and you can just follow it. And for me, that I really kind of clung on to that concept. And oh, by the way, it's significantly faster. It's orders of magnitude faster than in Ruby. It doesn't consume nearly as much memory. It's already set up for multi-core consumption and distributed code. So all those things were really nice to have as well. I've never really done any distributed application development before. I can't say that I have done real Elixir distributed application development yet, other than some of the examples in the PragProg book. But to know that I have this tool under my belt that has 30 years of experience in building out huge distributed systems is really nice to have, and definitely something that I want to explore more in the next year.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I had similar interest in Elixir, and we've had Chris McCord on recently, who's the author of the Phoenix Framework, and he kind of did a good job of selling the idea that it's something worth looking into. And for me, I'm still very interested in it, but where I kind of like anytime there's something that's just built on top of another language, it just feels like it's always going to be like a hobby, or it's I don't know. There's something like it feels like the longevity is not guaranteed, whereas like Erlang itself, was built way back in the 80s, I think, or I don't know when it started, but way back in the day, and it's been around for years, and it's so mature. And I respect Jose Valim quite a bit. It's just as like you do. And so this isn't a knock on him or his idea or anything, but did it feel like it's just a bolt on to a thing that already, that's established, or does it feel like it's its own thing?
It definitely feels like it's its own. And also it's, from what I've heard at, I think it's called Erlang Factory, which is like the big Erlang conference.
Oh, okay.
I think there's actually consultancy, but I think they have a conference annually.
I think you're right, yeah.
And I could be wrong. Someone may say you're wrong, Brian, but I seem to Erlang Factory pops up in my head. But anyway, I heard that there's a growing number of Elixir attendees, like a significant number of Elixir attendees that are being attracted to the conference, because Elixir is like this gateway drug, and Erlang has always had kind of not a closed community. It's definitely not closed, but it's been more of an academic language and used for those purposes than Ruby or JavaScript or Python have been used for web application development. And now Elixir has kind of thrown open the doors to the masses, right? It's this very approachable language built on great technology. And I wouldn't be surprised if more people are doing Elixir than are going to be doing
Erlang.
You're going to be doing Erlang. Because it's not. I don't think that the analogy of like Elixir to Erlang is the same as JRuby to Java, JVM. I don't think that. I never dreamed that JRuby would ever overtake Java world in any way.
Yeah.
It always kind of felt like this. No knock against the JRuby team, because those are like Charles Nutter, super smart guy, and like the way that they built that out is amazing. But it always kind of felt like this halfway world between Ruby and Java, whereas Elixir definitely feels like its own thing onto itself. Like that, you not only get this nice language, and I say language with quotes around it because it's very more of a it's like a parser, and then most of Elixir standard library is written in Elixir itself. Even certain things like if statements are written in Elixir, because it will just parse it, and then it gets access to the AST, and that gets exported to Beam. And this is so you can augment the language any way that you want, which can be good or bad. In fact, in Chris McCord's book, the metaprogramming for Elixir book, he sets out some rules of macro development, and like I think the first one was don't write macros, and the second one may also be don't write macros. And so it's
and then he shows macros, you how to write macros after that.
Yeah, the rest of the book is writing macros, but it's it's one of those things that it's a very powerful feature that is core to Elixir, but do you really want to go down the road of building out like all these language features that'll be non-standard? People that are joining the project won't know what it is, versus perhaps working with the language itself. But if you need to do something, if you need to grasp that power, it's there if you need it.
Another aspect of Elixir that just questions that I have around it, especially from the perspective of what you said with Dockyard, is you're trying to grow a large consultancy. Is access to people who are good at it. Prospective hires for you or developers that could build your backends out. Has that been an issue, or do you see that being an issue down the road?
For hiring Elixir developers or just Ember?
Elixir specifically,
we have had. I wouldn't say that anybody in the shop right now is a dedicated Elixir developer.
Okay.
Majority of our contracts that over the past year have come our way have actually been specifically client-side application development with Ember.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the most common case would be that it's actually interesting because now that we've done so well in the Ember world, I think a lot of clients that come to us actually don't know that we can do back-end development.
Yeah.
And so they've actually gone out in many cases, hired a separate team to do the back-end. A lot of the time it's Rails or something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked them why they did that. Why didn't they just come to us? And like, oh, we thought you guys were just Ember. And so we're hoping to establish ourselves in the same way that we did with Ember from a marketing perspective, right? And that's going to require us to start releasing open source for Phoenix and Elixir, start really blogging about our experience with it, start getting some example client projects, case studies on how perhaps we rewrote a particular backend that was pre-existing in Phoenix and what type of advantages and disadvantages were there. That's going to take some time. But I think that anytime a consultancy engages heavily in a new technology and gets involved with the growth and community of that technology, they put themselves in a really good position to benefit from it if that technology ends up doing well.
Right.
I think Ember's done well in Ember 2.0, and especially Ember 2.1, because 2.0 is more like the transition. We remove all the deprecations from 1.13. 2.1 is when we get a lot of nice new stuff. That's going to, I think, see a lot higher rate of adoption because the barrier of entry to Ember is being knocked down all the time with every new release. They're just making it easier and easier to get into Ember. So now Ember CLI is actually, they did lockstep versioning, so we're at 1.13. We went from 0.2 to 1.13 overnight. But the barrier of entry for Ember is getting smaller. So Ember is going to become more adoptable, and because Dockyard's in a good position, we'll benefit from that.
Yeah.
I think that Phoenix and Elixir are really good technologies, and especially the closer Phoenix gets to 1.0, we'll see an increase in momentum. And if we can position ourselves in such a way that, Dockyard is a good consultancy for building out Phoenix applications, then we'll benefit from that as well. So we kind of have this two-pronged approach. We're establishing ourselves, I guess, like you said early on, betting on a particular client-side application framework and betting on a back-end technology, both of which are, Ember's not exactly new at this point, but Phoenix is definitely new.
Yeah, I mean, back, I can't remember when it was when you decided or when you posted about Ember, your guys' new focus on Ember. I remember reading that post and thinking, I had tried Ember at the time, and I was dabbling with the different, client-side MVC things as well, and just trying to see, like, where do I go? Where do I invest myself as a developer to, to produce good quality product and to make myself a viable person in the next 5 years or whatever. And to me, I mean, I was turned on to Ember because of the people behind it. Like they come from the Ruby land and all that, and I respect Yehuda, and we've had him on the show multiple times. Ember data was so immature at the time that it felt like Ember was mostly promises back then, like good promises, but like there wasn't much substance behind. Like I could tell, man, there's so much work to do before this is awesome. And then I kind of looked into Angular, and Angular was more productive immediately, and so I had like a 6-month love affair with Angular. Yeah. And then I kind of, kind of faded on that a little bit. But now with Ember 2.0, and it seems like Ember's finally here. But is that safe to say? Like Ember's now arrived, and it wasn't really, like you guys probably had a lot of shoring up to do around it back then. Is that
Ember's been slowly arriving for a while now, right? It's like this. It's like this massive ship that's coming in the harbor, being pulled along by a tiny tugboat or something. I don't know. That might be a bad analogy, but yeah, it does. I've said several times that I actually think that Ember 2.0 is really Ember 1.0. In many ways, like 1.0 being like this is the direction that we want to go in. Ember 1.0, I think that they reached some place of stability, and they wanted to get a 1.0 out there to start seeing adoption and use cases come in, and so that the use cases have really driven the direction of Ember. I think it will continue to drive the direction of Ember, but it significantly drove the direction of Ember between 1.0 and 2.0. While I'm going to say it was almost all, like it was mostly semantically versioned between 1.0 and 2.0. I would debate on whether or not it was 100%, but I think for the most part, amongst most open source projects, it was probably the closest to being like as perfect semantically version as you can get. But the direction changed quite a bit, or they at least found the right use cases for pushing in one direction versus the other. I think that 2.0 is really going to be the version that people look at and say, okay, this is something that we can build something in. This is something that is competitive with the other frameworks that are out there. Mm-hmm. We have the fast rendering engine with Glimmer. We have the client-side application tool with Ember CLI. We're reducing, I shouldn't say we, but core team is reducing the barrier of entry by just cutting out the fat. The enumerable, many of the enumerable tools that were in Ember were just removed. So why have all these array prototype stuff
right?
If you can just depend upon Lodash? Maybe a better citizen in the JavaScript community, leverage the tools that are out there rather than rewriting them.
Yeah.
Controllers are still in 2.0, but they've really been kind of, mum's the word on controllers. But object controller, array controller have been pulled out. It's just going to really simplify the amount of things people have to learn within Ember. What I will say, though, is that it has also increased the barrier of entry from before you ever get to Ember. So now people need to be an effective Ember developer, or the quote-unquote Ember way of doing things. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to really understand ES6, ES7-ish type stuff.
Right.
ES6 modules. You'll have to, if you want to debug certain stuff, you're going to have to start understanding how the build process works for Ember CLI. So I think the complexity of knowledge has been shifted off of the framework and more to the tooling. Mm. And hopefully that will start to simplify and normalize, especially as browsers begin to implement many of these ES6 features, and Ember CLI itself becomes, built out even more.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely seeing the maturation of Ember, and I think even the maturation of client-side MVC. One thing I want to talk about, we are going to take our second sponsor break. When we come back, I want to talk about, you guys said this new website's built how we believe modern web apps should be built with Ember and Phoenix. I want to talk about the technical aspects of Dockyard.com because traditionally, in the last few years, single-page apps or client-side MVC frameworks, where they've really shined is, dashboards, heavily interactive visuals, like anywhere where you're chilling on the same page for a long time and you're just loading new data in. But where they haven't is on content sites. It's kind of been the web app versus website debate. And the interesting thing about Dockyard.com is, it's effectively a content site, and it's not a dashboard. It's not a rich, it's a rich UI, but you know what I'm saying. And so,
it's not an application.
It's not an application. It's a website, right? And yet, you still think that Ember and Phoenix and that separation is the way that these should be made and built. So I think there's been some advances. You mentioned Glimmer and some other things. I think we'll talk about some of the technical details of the website when we get back.
HipChat is a game changer for team communication. It helps you and your team get the information you need faster than email and reduces meaningless meetings. Teams that use HipChat are able to make faster decisions and get more work done with group chat, video chat, and file sharing. HipChat is a great solution for distributed teams by letting you take the office with you no matter where you go. iPhone, Android, Mac OS, it's all there. HipChat is easy to use and gets everyone working in real time. And right now, HipChat is offering listeners of the Changelog 90 days of HipChat Plus totally free. Get premium features like unlimited file storage, unlimited message history, and guaranteed support totally for free for 90 days. Visit hipchat.com/changelog. Again, that's hipchat.com/changelog. Get your team started using HipChat Plus today. Go and check them out.
All right, Brian, let's talk about the technical details of Dockyard.com, how it was built, how Ember and Phoenix work together, and take me through it, deployment, all the goodies, all the technicals.
So the previous, I'd say, 2 or 3 iterations of our website were built in Rails, and we were no longer really doing Rails. I think that if we're in our blog posts, in our open source, in our presentations, telling people that you should be using this technology, we kind of have to dog food it. We have to walk that walk. We have to say, okay, we think you should be using this technology because we use it, rather than just maybe using middleman or some sort of static site generator.
Yep.
So we set out to rebuild and redesign Dockyard.com around Ember and Phoenix. It was a little bit of a bumpy road, mostly because we were trying to use some really edge technology in the Ember world. Specifically, this new thing that was just released at the time called Fastboot. Actually, I don't even think it was like production ready released. So Fastboot was or is Ember's solution for server-side rendering of your Ember application for the purposes of SEO.
Right.
It was built by Tom and Yehuda, and they were sponsored by Bustle, which is a company, I think, in New York, I want to say. I may be wrong. But anyway, and they've actually leveraged a lot of the work they did on Fastboot to build out the Glimmer rendering engine in Ember. So it had some, very high impact benefits doing that particular feature. So Fastboot would actually take your Ember application and boot it up in Node. And so when you hit it, when you hit the request, it will render out your Ember application server side, serve it up to you as a server side rendered application, and it would be there. And then Ember would launch in your browser, and I think the process they called it is hydrate the DOM. And so it would just kind of realize that this is already a Ember generated application, and we're just going to kind of latch onto it and take over, so we don't have to redo everything. That was the theory. In reality, what we saw was that, but Fastboot at the time had some really ugly memory leaks in it, and so we, like most memory leaks, they did not come up until after production.
Right.
Dockyard.com. Always benchmark your applications, I guess, or stress test them.
All right.
But we were so excited to get it out. We had to pull back, and what we I think Dockyard, someone may say, hey, we had one up before, but I'm pretty sure that Dockyard.com was the first production Fastboot application out there. It may still only be one of the only ones out there. And what we've done to solve the memory leak issues was we're still using Fastboot, but when we deploy a new application, it will actually send it to our backend server as well. We use our sitemap to walk through and generate all the static templates with Fastboot, and then those static templates sit behind Nginx. Nginx serves up, them up through its cache, and so we get the benefits of the SEO, but it's not as smooth as Fastboot would be. But it's still a very fast website. Like, even though we're still using Ember, and that was a complaint people always had, like, oh, Ember's so fat, Ember's slow to load.
Right.
If you go to Docker.com, I think on average it loads up in like 0.75 seconds, which is pretty quick for a client-side application. We were able to shrink down our asset size, I believe, to close to 200K, somewhere around there, which is pretty reasonable. And we, like, our blog actually sits in a database. And so when you hit the blog, this is being served up by Phoenix. And it's, I believe, almost all the pages.
The whole page, or just the data? The whole page?
All the data. So
all the data.
If you were to, if you look at your like a network tab, you can see the data coming in. So this is all being served up by, all of our data is being served up by Phoenix. I think most of the content pages actually sit in the database. Like, all of our team members sit in the database. So we have Phoenix acting as this like dumb API
Mm-hmm.
that's just being serving up data, and then Ember is our client side, and um, we haven't heard any drawbacks from doing it this way. We haven't heard any people saying like, oh, we get the occasional like, oh, you should support non-JavaScript browser type troll stuff, but we don't really pay attention to that way of thinking anymore. But it's a very fast website. Like switching between pages is very fast, and that's what I want out of an application. And so that's what I say that we feel that this is the way to build it, because speed and response time is, I think, becoming a very, very important concern for usability and the user experience of any application. So we chose a framework and a backend technology that gave us the best speed, as well as being, I think, fits best into our sensibilities as engineers.
Yeah. So when you navigate pages, I mean, there's no hashtag in the URL or anything. You got your URLs are clean. Is that still Ember's doing all that routing, correct?
Correct.
So is that just a feature of newer browsers? Does that work on everything?
Yeah. So I think we might be using autolocation actually, and in Ember, autolocation will detect whether or not you have the history API in your, whether or not that's available to your browser. And if it does, it'll give us this nice clean, URLs. If it doesn't, it'll fall back to the hashtag.
Okay.
Go to the hash version.
Right.
I think like IE 10 below, I think like IE 9, IE 8 stuff, they may fall back. But most evergreen browsers now, I believe, all evergreen browsers are actually history API.
So what is autolocation? Is that a library? Is that a part of Ember proper?
It's part of Ember. So if you were to generate a new Ember application with the Ember CLI, I think it's in the config environment file. There may be something about location, and then it's set to auto. I think it's. I'm talking off the top of my head.
Sure.
I think it may be there. But that's where Ember's router will decide what type of URLs it's going to generate through its links.
Yeah, I just found the page. We'll link that up in the show notes. It says Ember autolocation will select the best location option based off browser support with the priority order history, and then hash, and then none.
Yep.
So that's pretty cool. Awesome. So you're kind of using a modified fast boot, or you're using
We're using regular fast boot, but we're not allowing public access to it.
Gotcha.
So Nginx is only serving up our cached-generated templates right now.
You kind of crawl it yourselves on deploy type of a thing.
Correct.
Okay. So it's a little bit of an engineering, what we would call maybe a hack to a certain degree until fast boot, can do it on its own, or it's just in service of even faster boot.
It was a hack to get us around the memory leak issue.
Right.
However, as of this past Monday, Stefan Penner on the core team believes he may have closed out all the remaining memory leaks on fastboot.
Nice.
So he wants us to move dockyard.com over to regular fastboot. I told him we're probably going to do that sometime in August.
Yeah, see what happens. That would be definitely interesting. Gosh, what else about this? So, just perusing it myself, it definitely loads fast. I mean, initial load is slower, but it's still pretty fast. And then obviously your page navigation is super fast. And I know you're using it kind of as like we're investing in these technologies. We're going to use these technologies. Is it possibly over-engineered for what you guys are trying to accomplish with your website?
It's over-engineered content site for sure.
Yeah, okay.
I don't. If someone approached us and said we want to build a content site,
you wouldn't build it this way.
No, not unless they had a very specific reason for doing so.
Yeah, that's kind of like where I've been. Is I'm trying to see like when does it become the way to build everything, right? I still feel like there's still use cases, and there's still what are you trying to accomplish, and let's build the website the way that makes the most sense for your goals. And I think you guys have done that with this because because you are a company that does this and you want to help. You're kind of pushing the bleeding edge to a certain degree with helping out with fast boot, helping out with these things, and showing off what you guys are capable of in a good way. But probably as far as about time and money and all that for the goals of a content site, still unless it has some specific needs, a static site generator or something simpler is probably still the way to go, at least, July 2015. Agree with that?
I think so,
Yeah.
for the most part. I do think that there's also something to consider around those that don't have as great internet access
Mm-hmm.
as we do in the United States, or if I'm not sure where you are, but on
Mm-hmm.
the East Coast, I think we have the best, at least the shortest distance to everything. And if you're somewhere in Africa and you're reading a very content-heavy site, do you really want to have to re-download the entire page on every single click, or is it going to be more performant to just download perhaps
Right.
the data set? So I think context matters,
Right.
and the concept and architecture of a client-side application really works well for many use cases that
Mm-hmm.
could be content-driven sites. But
Yeah.
as far as like a shop site, like if we weren't an Ember shop, then we probably wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I feel like we're breaking down barriers, like the SEO barriers broken down, and to a certain degree the URL cleanness barriers starting to be broken down. And yeah, context always matters. So I could see where, as long as you get, I mean, sometimes on a slow connection, you don't get that that initial download never happens, and then you're like, well, so it's give or take, but
Mhm.
awesome. Anything else about Ember or Elixir or
Yeah,
that?
I'll say
Go ahead.
one last thing about Ember.
Okay.
So another really nice feature that's coming soon is that a developer from LinkedIn is working on this.
Mm-hmm.
We will have the ability to create even smaller versions of Ember pretty soon. So right now with ES6 modules, we're doing like import statements at the top, and we import a specific module. What's going to be coming pretty soon through Ember CLI is the ability to walk that import tree and only transpile the specific modules that we're using. So right now, when we import Ember, we get the entire Ember thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the future, we're going to say like import Ember -get, import Ember -component. If we don't use like the evented service for whatever reason, then we won't have that in our final asset output. Mm-hmm. And so our footprints can be significantly smaller. So people's issue with the size of Ember should pretty much be going away soon enough.
That's great. Then the size of your asset bundle kind of scales up with the size of your application. How much of the features are you actually using? You get bigger and bigger, but for those people that just want to take advantage of the routing and the other niceties, you have a smaller bundles. That'll be excellent. Any idea on timing around those kind of progress?
I think that's a when it's done type feature, but I know that they're actively working on it because it's a big concern for LinkedIn.
Right. Awesome. Well, let's take a moment to do our awesome closing questions. Got two of them for you here, and the first one is one that we ask quite often: is that if you had to pick somebody out there, you could have more than one if you need to, but if you had to pick a programming hero, somebody you look up to, who would that be and why?
I'd probably pick he just left Dockyard, but Robert Jackson. He is a core team member of Ember, and in the year and a half-ish time that he was at Dockyard, the guy just super impressed me with his ability to not just get things done, but also remember things. Like he's got like he can recall. I like when I work on code, I'm familiar with what I worked on, and I kind of go, if I don't touch it for a month, I gotta go back and kind of familiarize myself with it. He just immediately remembers exactly what he was like, what it was. He can tell you everything, and like that level of recall was just super impressive. I think he was excellent to work with.
Very cool. I'm definitely gonna link him up in the show notes, and I had never heard of Robert Jackson, so I'll be checking him out.
I think he's the number one committer on Ember right now.
So he moved on from Dockyard. Where is he moving on to? Does he have plans, or is it kind of?
I think the name of the company is Aptable.
Okay.
I think I'm not sure if I'm really. I think they've brought their product out, but they're kind of doing Heroku for healthcare. So like a big problem with healthcare companies on Heroku is the compliancy.
Yeah.
And I think that they're trying to solve that problem for platform as a service healthcare applications.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a big market if you can get it. Cool. Next one is what's on your open source radar? We've obviously talked a lot of different open source projects, and feel free to mention ones that you're up to personally or that Dockyard's doing. But if you had a free weekend and you were going to just play with something new and exciting that has your eye, what would it be?
I actually have to do the opposite. I have to stop playing with stuff because I got like developer ADD and I get onto too much stuff. I mean, that is probably part of the reason why I pushed my company in the direction I have rather than taking a safe bet and let's keep doing Rails.
Okay.
I mean, if there's something I want to do more stuff with distributed code in Elixir.
Cool.
I don't have a specific library for that though.
Cool. Speaking of Dockyard and Elixir and open source, I noticed you guys have a library out there for testing Phoenix JSON APIs called Voorhees. Any other cool open source, GitHub projects that you or Dockyard's up to that you want to give a shout out to?
I have like a 25% completed Elixir. They're called applications in Elixir. They're not libraries.
Okay.
But I think that's a Erlang term.
Okay.
Which still feels a little weird to me. But I have one that it's kind of like a fixture library for Phoenix applications, Elixir applications. It's going to have a very simple DSL for declaring fixtures.
Got a name for it?
I just have it called fixtures right now.
It's called fixtures.
It's not very creative.
All right. Cool. Well, I'm distracted searching for it on your GitHub. Is it still? You're working on it. Well, it's only 25% done. You got to get to at least 60% done. Then you put it online.
Yeah, and then I only bring it to about 70% of it, and then I move on to something else.
Yeah, then you find a maintainer. Well, Brian, thanks so much for joining us. I really enjoyed picking your brain on all these things. How can people reach you out there on the internets?
Probably don't want to follow me on Twitter, but you want to check out @Dockyard on Twitter.
Okay.
We put all of our stuff on there. We actually just finished, so we hosted a conference, Wicked Good Ember Conf, in June. We had about 200 people there. We were on an island, so we talked about that experience. We mention all our blog posts through our Twitter account. That's probably the easiest way to kind of catch up with what I'm up to.
Cool. Very cool. Well, as always, links are in the show notes. You can find those at changelog.com/165. We also want to thank all of our members and our awesome sponsors for making this show possible. This week's sponsors are CodeShip, Code School, and HipChat. As I said before, we have a bunch of awesome shows in the works. Some of those are Mesosphere, Prometheus, NEJSConf, Crystal, BoltDB, Editor Wars, and a whole lot more. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, why not? Remember, we have an open inbox on github.com/thechangelog/ping. Give us a shout there with your show ideas, entering projects that you have or that you've created, or just say hi. We love hearing from you.
I want to announce that we're going to become a Crystal development shop tomorrow.
Oh, breaking news!
Yeah, it's breaking news.
Crystal is the new hotness. Very cool.
It does look like a cool technology.
I'm excited for that show. We're very interested in it. That should be a good one. But until next time, let's go ahead and say goodbye. See ya.
Oh, goodbye.